On the night the richest man in the city laughed at her, everyone in the restaurant thought they were about to witness a humiliation. Instead, they witnessed history. By the time dessert was served, a waitress in a black vest and worn heels would dismantle a billionaire's arrogance with nothing but her voice, her mind, and the truth he never saw coming. And the silence that followed would be worth more than all his money. Stay with me, because what happened that night didn't just silence a billionaire. It changed every person in that room forever. The restaurant was the kind of place where wealth whispered instead of shouted. Crystal glasses, polished silver, golden wall lamps casting soft light over deep red velvet booths. Conversations floated low and careful like secrets too expensive to waste, and among it all moved Elena Rossi. To most people, she was simply the waitress. Slim black vest, crisp white shirt, hair pulled back into a precise ponytail, efficient, quiet, invisible. Invisible was safe. No one saw the framed doctorate degree tucked behind her small apartment door. No one knew she once stood at podiums in lecture halls. Speaking about economic justice and global wealth disparity, no one knew she had published research that challenged billion-dollar corporate systems. No one knew she had lost everything because she refused to stay silent. 3 years earlier, Elena had been Dr. Elena Rossi, PhD in economics, rising academic star. She had exposed statistical manipulations in a powerful corporation's a charitable housing initiative. The project claimed to uplift low-income communities, but her research proved it displaced them. That corporation was owned by Victor Langford, billionaire, media darling, philanthropist, and ruthless. Within months of her publication, funding for her research vanished, anonymous complaints appeared, contracts disappeared, universities stopped returning calls. Doors closed quietly, politely, permanently. She refused to retract her findings, so they erased her instead. When savings ran out and student loans loomed like a storm cloud, she took the only job that didn't ask about controversy, just availability: waitress. It wasn't shameful work. Shameful work. It was honest work. But every time a customer snapped their fingers or avoided eye contact, she felt the weight of everything she had once been. That night, she picked up a leather-bound menu and approached table 14 and froze. Victor Langford, older than she remembered from magazine covers, silver threaded through his dark hair, calm, composed, radiating the casual authority of a man who had never heard the word no. Across from him sat a young woman in a yellow dress, elegant but uneasy. She studied the menu as if it required a survival strategy. Elena steadied her breath. Professional, invisible. A good evening, she said softly. Can I start you with still or sparkling water? Victor glanced up, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. He didn't place her immediately. Not yet. A sparkling, he said, distracted, returning to his menu. Elena turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Excuse me. She faced him again. Yes, sir. He leaned forward slightly, studying her face. Have we met before? Her pulse quickened. This was the moment she had rehearsed in nightmares. No, sir. I don't believe so. He held her gaze longer than necessary, then shrugged. You have one of those faces. One of those faces. Forgettable. Replaceable. She nodded politely and walked away, her spine straight even as her stomach twisted. In the kitchen, her hands trembled slightly as she poured the water. Fate had a strange sense of humor, because tonight of all nights, Victor Langford had chosen her section. Dinner unfolded in careful stages. Victor spoke loudly about investments, acquisitions, influence. The woman across from him laughed at the right moments, but barely touched her food. Lena delivered each course with quiet precision. She couldn't help overhearing fragments. Markets respond to strength. People don't understand how the world works. A charity is strategy. The words burned. Finally, as she placed the main course in front of him, Victor looked up again, and this time recognition fully bloomed. His eyes narrowed. Oh, wait, he said slowly. Rossi. Her breath caught. A Dr. Rossi, he continued, a slow smile spreading. From that little university scandal. The young woman looked between them, confused. Elena felt every eye at nearby tables tilt subtly toward them. Yes, she said calmly. That was me. Victor leaned back, amused. Oh well, life is full of surprises. There was no anger in his voice, only amusement. How the mighty fall, he added lightly. The words were soft, but they landed like a slap. Silence stretched between them. The entire restaurant seemed to lean closer. seemed to lean closer. Elena could have apologized. She could have walked away. She could have swallowed the humiliation the way she had for 3 years. Instead, something inside her, something that had survived being erased, stood up. "May I say something, Mr. Langford?" she asked quietly. He smirked. "By all means." And in that moment, the waitress stopped being invisible. Elena placed the serving tray down carefully, as if setting the stage. "You once said," she began evenly, "that markets reward efficiency." Victor tilted his head. "I stand by that. And that displacement is sometimes a necessary byproduct of progress." He nodded. "Economic reality isn't sentimental." A few nearby diners pretended not to listen. Elena's voice remained calm, but it carried. "Your housing initiative displaced over 4,000 families. The majority were relocated to areas without access to public transportation or employment infrastructure." Victor's smile thinned. "You're still clinging to that narrative?" "It wasn't a narrative," she replied gently. "It was data." The young woman across from him shifted in her seat. Victor chuckled. "A data can be interpreted many ways." "Yes," Elena said. But eviction notices are rarely open to interpretation." A fork clinked against a plate somewhere in the restaurant. Victor's jaw tightened. "You're a waitress now." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "Yes," she said. "Then perhaps," he said smoothly, "you should focus on serving tables instead of lecturing on economics." There it was. The line meant to shrink her. And for one flickering second, doubt whispered, "You lost." He won. But then she looked at the young woman in the yellow dress. She saw something familiar there. Uncertainty, intimidation, the quiet shrinking of oneself in the presence of power. And Elena understood something in that moment. This wasn't about reclaiming her career. This was about reclaiming her voice. She turned back to Victor. "You're right," she said softly. "I am a waitress." He relaxed slightly. "Oh, but I'm also the economist who proved your company manipulated impact reports by categorizing displaced residents as voluntary relocations." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Victor's expression hardened. How his expression hardened. That accusation was never substantiated. It was buried," she corrected calmly. "There's a difference." The air in the room changed. Not loud, not dramatic, but electric. "You see," Elena continued, her voice steady as marble, "wealth can buy silence. It can buy headlines. It can buy headlines. It can buy reputations." She held his gaze. But it can't rewrite truth." Victor's composure cracked, not dramatically, but subtly, a tightening around the eyes. A stillness. "A careful," he warned quietly, and that was when the young woman across from him finally spoke. "Is it true?" she asked him. The question was small, but it was devastating. Victor looked at her, then at Elena, then around the restaurant. For the first time in his life, he realized something terrifying. People were listening, not because he was powerful, but because someone had challenged him. He opened his mouth and found nothing that didn't sound hollow. Elena didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to insult him. She didn't need to win. She had already done the impossible. She had made a billionaire hesitate. And in that hesitation was the most expensive silence he had ever paid for. Victor stood abruptly, placing his napkin on the table. "This is inappropriate," he muttered. He pulled out his wallet, dropping several large bills onto the table, far more than the check required. A display of dominance. But it felt smaller now. He left without finishing his meal. The restaurant remained quiet for several seconds after the door closed. Then slowly, conversations resumed, but something had shifted. The young woman in the yellow dress remained seated. She looked up at Elena, not with pity, with admiration. "I thank you," she whispered. Elena smiled gently. "For what?" For saying what no one else would." Later that night, as Elena wiped down tables, her manager approached cautiously. "I heard what happened," he said. She braced herself. Instead, he surprised her. "You handled yourself with dignity," he said quietly. "Whatever your story is, don't let anyone shrink it." When her shift ended, Elena stepped outside into the cool night air. She didn't have her old title back. She didn't have a university office. She didn't have funding. But she had something she almost lost. Herself. The next morning, a diner who had witnessed everything posted about the exchange online. Not a scandal, not gossip, a story. About a waitress with a PhD who refused to be erased. It spread. Slowly at first, then widely. Former colleagues reached out. Journalists asked questions. Old research resurfaced. Truth, once buried, began to breathe again, but the most important transformation wasn't public. It was internal, because that night proved something powerful. You do not need a stage to have a voice. You do not need wealth to command a room, Zeitmate, and you do not need permission to speak truth. Sometimes the most powerful sound in the world is the silence of someone who expected you to stay quiet. And somewhere in a high rise office, a billionaire who once believed he controlled narratives stared at a screen filled with headlines he could no longer silence. While in a small apartment across town, a waitress removed her apron, looked at the degree on her wall, and smiled. Because she had never really fallen, she had simply been waiting. And when the moment came, she stood.